a war that dominated every television screen on the planet, but on the ground it lasted just 100 hours. Green night vision footage, tracer fire clawing at the sky, smart bombs dropping neatly down chimneys. To millions watching at home, it almost looked like a video game. But for the people in the desert, nothing about it was virtual. It was heat, exhaustion, fear, and the roar of machines. Tanks racing through darkness, soldiers waiting in trenches, and oil wells burning like volcanoes. This is the story of Desert Storm's 100-hour war. How it exploded into being, how it ended so quickly, and why its shadow still stretches across the Middle East today. In August 1990, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein made a fateful move. His army, one of the largest in the world, rolled south across the border into tiny, oil-rich Kuwait. Kuwait's defenses collapsed within hours. Iraqi tanks paraded through Kuwait City. The royal family fled. Overnight, a small, wealthy state vanished from the map. Around the world, the reaction was swift. The United Nations condemned the invasion and demanded that Iraq withdraw. Economic sanctions followed, but Saddam refused to pull back. For many leaders, this was more than a regional dispute. If Iraq swallowed Kuwait and threatened neighboring Saudi Arabia, it could control a huge share of the world's oil and the balance of power in the region. In Washington, U.S. President George H.W. Bush announced that this naked aggression would not stand. Almost immediately, American transport planes began landing in Saudi Arabia. Tanks, infantry, aircraft, and support units poured into the desert to protect the kingdom and prepare for what might come next. The defensive buildup received a code name, Operation Desert Shield. At first, no one knew whether it would end in a negotiated withdrawal or a major war. But day by day, as Iraq dug deeper into Kuwait, war seemed more likely. Through the autumn of 1990, an enormous international coalition took shape. More than 30 countries sent troops, aircraft, or ships. The United States provided the bulk of the combat power, but units arrived from Britain, France, Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and many others. Empty stretches of desert transformed into sprawling bases. Rows of beige tents appeared. Fuel bladders, ammunition stacks, and communication antennas sprouted from the sand. At remote airfields, sleek American, British, and Saudi jets crowded runways. On the ground, columns of M1 Abrams tanks, British Challengers, and armored vehicles from across the coalition lined up for exercises, kicking up dust clouds that could be seen for miles. Iraq still looked fearsome on paper. Years of war with Iran had built a huge combat-experienced army, backed by thousands of tanks and heavy guns. In Kuwait and southern Iraq, Iraqi engineers built deep defensive lines, trenches, minefields, and sand berms bristling with bunkers and artillery. Saddam's commanders believed that these fortifications would drag any attacker into a long, bloody slog. Coalition planners had no interest in throwing their troops straight into that wall of fire. Their strategy was simple: destroy Iraq's ability to fight before the first tank crossed the border. The opening blow would come from the air. Shortly after midnight on January 17, 1991, the sky above Baghdad and other key cities suddenly erupted. Stealth bombers slipped through Iraqi radar nets. Cruise missiles screamed in from ships at sea. Waves of coalition aircraft struck air defense sites, command bunkers, communication hubs, and air bases. Within hours, Iraqi radar screens went dark across much of the country, and many of its aircraft were trapped on the ground. For the next several weeks, the air campaign never let up. Coalition jets flew thousands of sorties a day, hitting bridges, fuel depots, ammunition bunkers, and troop concentrations. Iraqi units that tried to move in daylight were often spotted and attacked from above. Television channels around the world broadcast videos of precision-guided bombs following laser dots into windows and ventilation shafts. Those images convinced many viewers that this was a clean, bloodless, high-tech war. In reality, most munitions were still unguided, dumb bombs, and the explosions on the ground were anything but clean. The war reached into the skies in another way. Seeking to raise the political cost of the conflict, Iraq launched Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia. Civilians there took shelter in gas masks as air raid sirens wailed. Patriot missile batteries fired interceptors to knock some of the Scuds from the air, flashes lighting up the night over crowded cities. Meanwhile, in their bunkers and trenches, Iraqi soldiers endured a constant drumbeat of air power. The thunder of bombs, the howl of jets, and the hiss of propaganda leaflets drifting down told them the coalition owned the sky. Fuel, food, and ammunition became harder to deliver. Radio links to higher headquarters often failed. By the time the air campaign entered its final weeks, many Iraqi units were isolated and exhausted. While aircraft pounded Iraqi positions, coalition generals were planning the next act. The obvious move was to strike straight north into Kuwait, where Iraqi forces were dug in and waiting. That was exactly what Saddam expected. So the coalition designed a different plan, one built on deception. Near the border, Marines and Arab coalition troops staged noisy rehearsals. They moved tanks openly, laid fake minefields, and even used inflatable decoys to suggest a massive frontal assault. Iraqi observers saw what they were meant to see, a large force preparing to slam directly into southern Kuwait. Farther west, out in seemingly empty desert, the real hammer was quietly assembling. Entire American armored corps and mechanized divisions, along with British and French units, shifted hundreds of kilometers through the sand. Convoys of fuel trucks, recovery vehicles, and supply trailers followed them like a moving city. Using new satellite navigation receivers, commanders could guide their formations across a landscape almost devoid of landmarks, something that had bedeviled armies in earlier desert wars. By late February, the air campaign had shattered much of Iraq's command structure. The time had come for the ground offensive. In the early hours of February 24, 1991, engineers blew gaps in minefields with explosive line charges. Bulldozers sliced through sand berms. Marine and Arab units surged into Kuwait from the south, battering Iraqi positions that had survived the bombing. Some Iraqi troops fought hard. Others, hungry and cut off, surrendered in groups, emerging from trenches with hands raised or waving strips of white cloth. At the same moment, the hidden arm swung into motion. To the far west, coalition armored forces crossed into Iraq itself, encountering only scattered resistance. Tank columns stretched across the horizon. Attack helicopters skimmed low, scouting ahead. This was the Great Left Hook, a wide sweep designed to get behind Iraqi forces in Kuwait, cut off their escape routes, and surround their best units. Within a day, these western thrusts had driven deep into Iraqi territory. They began turning east, aiming for key road junctions and supply lines. Soon, they collided with Iraq's elite formations, the Republican Guard divisions. These units were better equipped and more motivated than the battered conscripts at the front. They brought tanks, artillery, and anti-tank missiles to the fight. Battles broke out across featureless stretches of sand, guided only by coordinates and radio calls. Here, technology gave the coalition a powerful edge. Thermal sights allowed tank crews to spot Iraqi vehicles at long range, even in darkness or through smoke. Modern radios and command systems helped units coordinate artillery barrages, airstrikes, and maneuver in almost real time. In actions like the Battle of 73 Easting, American armored cavalry stumbled onto large Iraqi tank formations and within minutes shredded them. Coalition gunners often fired first and hit accurately, while many Iraqi shots fell short or went wide. Coalition casualties were not zero, but compared to earlier wars, the losses were remarkably light, and the destruction of Iraqi armor was overwhelming. Back in Kuwait, ground forces pressed steadily north. As Iraqi units realized they were being outflanked and cut off, many tried to flee toward Basra. Along one main highway, retreating convoys of tanks, trucks, and stolen civilian vehicles clogged the road. Coalition aircraft and artillery attacked them, turning the route into a long line of burned and abandoned machines. Images of that devastated roadway, later dubbed the Highway of Death, sparked debate around the world about where legitimate military action ended and punishment began. At the same time, Iraqi forces set fire to hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells. Giant pillars of flame roared into the sky. Dense black smoke rolled across the desert, turning midday into unnatural twilight. The burning oil fields created one of the worst environmental disasters in history, poisoning air, soil, and water long after the shooting stopped. By February 26th, the strategic picture was clear. Iraqi forces had been driven from Kuwait. Many of their units were destroyed, captured, or in chaotic retreat. The Republican Guard had taken heavy punishment, though some brigades managed to escape northward. The coalition had achieved the objective laid out by the United Nations, the liberation of Kuwait. Now came the most controversial decision of the war. Should the coalition push on to Baghdad, overthrow Saddam Hussein, and risk urban combat, higher casualties, and the collapse of the fragile international alliance? Or should it stop where the mandate stopped, at the border of a freed Kuwait? President Bush and his advisors chose to halt. They argued that occupying Iraq would lead to an open-ended commitment, something the American public and many coalition partners did not want. On February 28th, after just 100 hours of ground combat, a ceasefire was declared. Soldiers who had expected weeks of fighting suddenly found the war over almost as soon as it had truly begun. On the casualty sheets, the coalition victory looked stunningly one-sided. Coalition deaths and wounded were far lower than in previous major wars. Advances in armor, medicine, and planning had saved many lives. For Iraqi forces, the story was the opposite. Tens of thousands killed or wounded, massive amounts of equipment lost, and an army that had once seemed powerful reduced to wreckage across the desert. Yet even a short war leaves long shadows. Kuwait was free, but badly scarred, its infrastructure damaged and its skies darkened by smoke. Iraq faced crushing economic sanctions and internal uprisings. The decision to leave Saddam in power meant years of no-fly zones, sporadic clashes, and tense standoffs. For the United States and its allies, Desert Storm became a symbol of restored confidence in military power. It showcased precision weapons, real-time satellite intelligence, and the global reach of television news. But it also raised hard questions about how images shape public understanding of war, and about what happens when a quick battlefield victory fails to solve the deeper political problems underneath. The 100-hour ground war of Desert Storm was brief, violent, and decisive. It marked the end of one chapter in the history of the Persian Gulf, and in many ways, the opening act of another. Long after the last tank left the desert, the consequences of those 4 days continued to shape the region, the lives of veterans on all sides, and the way the world thinks about high-tech war in the modern age.